The station was loud with wind and the scrape of boots against warped wood, but no one spoke to her. Temmie Willow stood near the edge of the platform, thick ankles swelling over the tops of borrowed boots, a worn carpet bag sagging at her side. The hem of her skirt fluttered like a prayer in the grit-laced breeze, but the prayer went unanswered. She had been standing there for an hour past the train's arrival, and still no one had come for her. Somewhere behind her, children shouted and chased each other, careless with the kind of joy that only comes before shame ever teaches silence. A whistle blew in the distance, and the train hissed its final goodbye, steam curling around her like ghost fingers. Temmie shifted her weight, wincing at the sharp sting in her left foot. The old wound from falling off a porch as a child had never healed quite right. Her gait was crooked now, just one more thing for a man to wrinkle his nose at. She had come here to be married. She had written letters. She had braided her hair every Sunday. She had lied about her size in ink, but sent a truthful photograph tucked behind a psalm. And still, he'd replied, until he saw her. The rancher, Wendell Taub, or something like that, had taken one look when she stepped off the train and turned to her sister, Della. She was slimmer, softer-voiced, all wide eyes and waifish charm. Temmie had watched him point. Della had hesitated only a second before stepping forward and taking his arm. No one said anything. Not him, not her sister, and certainly not Temmie. The ticket clerk had told her she'd need to pay again if she wanted to leave. Eastbound trains weren't free just because your future got stolen. So she'd waited, breathing through the ache in her foot and the deeper one in her chest, until the crowd thinned and only stray glances remained. She might have stayed there all night if the boy hadn't thrown a stone. It hit her shin with a dull thud, more insult than injury, and Temmie didn't flinch. That was the moment Silas McGraw noticed her. He had come into town for fencing wire and medicine for his daughter's cough. Silas was a large man, not in girth but in presence. Shoulders broad from hauling feed, belly round but solid, like the trunk of an old cottonwood. His beard was the color of rusted iron, and his eyes were tired but kind. He stood beside a weathered bay mare, one hand resting on the saddle horn, the other holding a little girl's fingers. The girl, Elsie, was pointing. "Papa, that lady's hurt." Silas turned his head slowly, gaze following the curl of her hand toward the woman at the station's edge. Her face was red, not from sunburn, but from the heat of being seen and dismissed. Her hair had come loose from its braid. She didn't look back at the boy who threw the stone. She didn't chase it. She simply stood there and endured. Silas stepped forward. Temmie didn't notice him until the mare's hooves clicked near the boardwalk. She looked up, flinched at the sight of a stranger, then caught herself. Her spine straightened with practiced pride. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. She narrowed her eyes. "Why wouldn't I be? Foot looks bad. Been worse." He nodded, silent. His daughter tugged at his sleeve. "She's bleeding." Temmie glanced down. The rock had split a scab on her shin, but she hadn't felt it over the throb in her foot. She sat down slowly on the edge of crate, breathing through the pain. "Want some water?" he asked, already unscrewing the canteen at his belt. She hesitated, then took it. The metal was warm from his body heat. She drank, letting it cool her throat, and handed it back without thanks. "Waiting on someone?" Silas asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "No," she said finally. He already came. His brow furrowed, but he didn't ask more. He crouched beside her, knelt until his eyes were level with hers. "You got a place to stay?" Temmie didn't answer. Silas stood, adjusted the brim of his hat. "Then you're coming with me." She laughed. "Not the real kind. The kind that cracked at the edges. You don't even know me." "I don't have to." Elsie watched silently, blinking up at the stranger in her father's shadow. "I'm not a stray dog," Temmie muttered. "No," Silas said, voice quiet. "But even a stray deserves a place to sit a while." He held out his hand. She stared at it, then at him. He didn't look away. The silence stretched. When she finally reached for him, her hand trembled slightly, but she let him lift her. People were watching now. Mrs. Abernathy from the general store stood with a hand over her heart, scandal blooming behind her spectacles. But no one spoke. Even the boy who'd thrown the stones scuffed his foot in the dirt and looked away. Silas helped Temmie into his wagon. He didn't comment on her weight. He didn't flinch when the seat creaked. He simply handed her the reins while he hoisted Elsie up beside her. They rode in silence for a long time. The prairie was golden with late summer heat, and the horizon stretched forever. Wind moved through the tall grass in slow, sorrowful waves. Somewhere a hawk called. Temmie adjusted her skirt, hyper-aware of her body, her breath, the way she filled space. She spoke without turning her head. "Why'd you do it?" Silas didn't answer at first. The creak of the wagon wheels filled the pause. "Because mercy don't mean much if you only offer it to folks who don't need it." That was the first thing he said that made her want to cry. They arrived at a modest house nestled between two oak trees. The fence leaned left. The windows needed scrubbing. But the porch had a swing, and the chimneys still smoked from the morning fire. It was a place where something could begin again. Silas helped her down, slower this time, as if she were porcelain. Inside, Elsie laid out a quilt near the hearth, and Silas brought a bowl of water for her foot. He knelt and gently lifted her skirt just enough to see the wound. He didn't flinch, didn't stare, just dabbed the blood away with the patience of a man who's tended hurt animals and hurting people alike. Temmie watched him work, throat tight. She didn't remember the last time someone had touched her without flinching. He looked up once, meeting her eyes. "You'll sleep here tonight. No fuss." Temmie swallowed. "And after?" Silas stood. "We'll see what you want come morning." She didn't argue. Not because she was grateful, not yet, but because part of her believed this might be the only place where her shape didn't need explanation. That night, she lay beside the hearth as the fire dimmed, and Elsie slept upstairs, her breath soft as wind. Temmie stared at the ceiling. Her foot ached, her heart more so, but beneath the pain was something unfamiliar. Not hope, not yet, but the space where hope could live if given time. Then came the sound, barely a creak, then footsteps on the porch. Someone was outside, and they were not alone. Morning rose gentle and gold over the McGraw ranch, laying its hands on every shingle, every dew-tipped blade of grass, as if blessing the broken things. Temmie stirred before the fire burned fully down, the ache in her foot returning like an old friend, dull and insistent. She pushed herself upright, blankets slipping to her lap, and found herself looking at a house not built for her, but not unkind to her either. There was bacon sizzling in the kitchen and the creak of wood above her as Elsie moved about upstairs. Silas stood by the stove, turning the pan like he'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't look at her right away. Didn't need to. She spoke softly. "You always feed the women you drag off train platforms." A smile ghosted across his face. "Only the ones who don't bite." She chuckled in spite of herself, and something in the air shifted, so slight it might have been imagined. He plated the bacon without ceremony and brought it to her with a half slice of cornbread, still warm. She took it in both hands, as if handling something sacred. The food sat heavy in her belly, but not uncomfortably. It was the weight of being seen, of being nourished. Outside, the wind whistled low through the prairie grass. Elsie came down with a rag doll, missing one arm, and plopped beside Temmie without hesitation. She started telling a story about a fox that stole chickens and married a bear. Temmie nodded along, smiling through bites of cornbread, and didn't notice the way Silas watched her, not with desire, but with something deeper, recognition. By noon, Temmie had hobbled to the porch and sat in a straight-back chair, sewing the hem of her dress that had torn in her sleep. Her fingers worked with quiet grace. Silas came and went from the barn, never far, his eyes flicking to her between chores. The air between them was calm, stretched and delicate like thread pulled taut. She didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask her to leave. That night, she peeled potatoes while Silas sliced onions. Elsie fell asleep on a chair, cradled in a quilt stitched with stars. Their movements in the kitchen were a soft dance, shoulders brushing, hands trading tools, the rhythm of two people not trying, just being. By the 5th day, word had traveled. A wagon passed by slower than necessary. 2 women from town came by with excuses to drop off canned peaches. One whispered something behind her hand. Temmie heard the words in and the phrase, "no preacher involved." She didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. That evening, Silas came in late from the north field, jaw tense. He said nothing about what he'd heard, but she could see it in the tightness of his mouth. Timmy washed the dishes slower that night. Later, as the wind whined through the shutters and shadows stretched long across the parlor floor, there came the sound of hoofs. A rider. Then a second. The porch creaked under unfamiliar weight. Timmy's hand froze around the ladle. Silas opened the door. Della stood there, veil in her hand, eyes red, dust clinging to her hem. Behind her, the man she married, Wendell, sat on his horse looking everywhere but at Timmy. Della stepped forward. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Timmy stared at her sister's face, still pretty, still slender, still unsure of what she wanted. The sight hit like a stone to the gut. "You found your place," Timmy said, voice even. Della shook her head, tears blooming. "He married me, yes, but I'm not the one he wanted." The words sliced something open. Timmy didn't look at Wendell. She kept her eyes on her sister. "You left me," she said simply. "You let him choose." "I was afraid," Della whispered. "I didn't want to be you." Silas stepped forward, not menacing, just solid. "You need a place to rest. You'll find it in the barn," he said. "My daughter's asleep. And this house don't run on apologies." Della hesitated, then nodded. Wendell dismounted and followed her into the dark. When the door closed again, silence returned, heavy and humming. Timmy sat down slowly, the pain in her foot secondary now to the ache pressing against her ribs. She looked at Silas. He didn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "What does it say about me? That I never expected better than what they gave." He knelt before her, not to worship, not to beg, just to meet her where she was. "It says you were brave enough to come anyway." Her throat tightened. For the first time, she reached for his hand. The next morning, the letter arrived. A rider from the east, dust-covered and bone-tired, handed it to Silas on the porch and rode off without waiting for a reply. Timmy opened it beneath the cottonwood. It was from a man who'd seen her photograph, before it had been swapped out for Della's. A man who said he didn't care about a crooked foot or a wide waist. A man who offered marriage, comfort, a train ticket, and a name. She folded the letter twice, then again, until it was small enough to hide in her palm. Silas leaned in the doorway, quiet. "Seems you've got choices now," he said. Timmy nodded. He added, almost too softly, "I won't stop you." She stood and turned toward him, the breeze lifting her hair, the sun casting her shadow beside his. "I could go," she said. "You could," he answered. "I could live easy." "You could," he said again. She stared at the letter. "But I wouldn't be seen." He said nothing. She stepped toward him, closed the distance not with boldness, but with quiet certainty. Her hand found his again. "You didn't ask for me," she said, voice catching. "But you saw me." He held her gaze. "I still do." They stood there, not kissing, not clutching, just standing in the long light, their shadows joined. Inside, Elsie's laughter rang like a bell. The wind stirred the curtains. And the letter, forgotten now, fluttered once in Timmy's hand before she let it go. It landed face down in the dust, just as another rider came around the bend, fast and unannounced. The horse foamed at the bit. The rider, a deputy this time, held a telegram and a warning. He called out before dismounting. "McGraw, it's about your brother. He's gone missing. There's blood on the saddle and signs of a struggle up north." Silas froze. Timmy's fingers curled tighter around his. Everything they'd built in silence now stood at the edge of noise.